You are our only hope. But no, for years, and as a teacher, and I've been teaching for many years, students always come in and say, Dr. Gurung, I studied so hard, but I only got a C. And I have a spiel of what I tell them, and it's based on research, and I do a lot of research. But ladies and gentlemen, every single research paper that I write on this, the first citation that comes up within the first few sentences is John Dunlowski. And it is my great honor to actually be here with Dr. John Dunlowski from Kent State University. For those of you who want all his accolades, his hundreds of papers, there'll be links elsewhere. This is not one of those stodgy kind of things. We're going to chat about studying. We're going to chat about studying. Truly, John Dunlowski is one of those people. For all of us who teach, when students ask us about teaching, we hasten to Dunlowski et al. 2013. And we're going to jump right in there. For those of you who need even more credibility, Show and Tell, most recently 2019, the Dunlowski and Rawson, excellent book. And notice it says Cognition and Education, all your questions answered, right? But no, this is about studying. So John, let's jump right into it, right?
Let's do it.
Yeah, you like that, right?
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. I know you are out in a farmhouse someplace, right? Is that sort of?
Absolutely. Secluded away, isolated from everything out here. I love it, actually.
Okay. Dr. Dunlowski, how should I study?
First, that's a great question. I get that a lot. And unfortunately, instead of answering it, I just have to come back with another question, which is, what are you studying for? Like, what is your learning objective, right? And because without really knowing your learning objective and how you will be tested, it's really difficult to plan on how to optimally study. So when I was starting assistant professor, I did a lot of teaching. And at first, two things kind of annoyed me. The student who said they studied a lot, yet did poorly, because I didn't believe that they were studying a lot. I was wrong. They are studying a lot. What I didn't realize at that point when I was a young assistant professor, they were studying a lot, they just weren't studying in the right way. And, in that context, it's very disappointing. So there's got to be a better way to prepare. And when I was a young assistant professor, I always was kind of annoyed too with the question from students like, well, what kind of test are you going to give? Or is this content going to be on the test? And it turns out anymore, I think really sophisticated students are the ones that ask the question, what's going to be on the test and how will I be tested? In fact, how I teach anymore is to make it very clear exactly what the learning objectives are for the students and how they're going to be tested, or how can they show off what they've learned. And it just turns out, depending on the course you're in, the learning objectives are going to be different, of course, and how you're going to be tested are going to be different. And depending on those constraints, you're going to want to use different kinds of strategies to prepare for your exams. Now, with that said, there are a couple of strategies that are kind of like hammers. Like with a hammer, you can almost fix anything, right? Certainly you can nail nails in, but you can pound screws in, you can rip things out, kind of an all-purpose tool. And, retrieval practice and spacing your practice across time are kind of these all-purpose tools that you can almost use regardless of your learning objective or how you're going to be tested. And if you want, I could talk about those strategies more, Reagan, or we can talk about some other kinds of approaches to learning, whatever you'd like.
So, John, you did something very neat here, which is, first off, I think you are empowering many of the students listening to go, wait a minute, my faculty member didn't give me student learning outcomes. What are they, right? And plus,
Right.
what a wonderful reminder for all the faculty listening to make sure that those student learning outcomes are not only in the syllabus, but also in the learning management systems, also, tied to each assignment. So I think far too often universities, departments, we put SLOs or student learning outcomes in our syllabi, but very often students skip past them. And I love your call to say, hey, students, no, they're there for a reason. Start there with the student learning outcome, right?
Absolutely. In fact, when I was a young assistant professor, I didn't do those things. I mean, first, I don't think students realize this, but many of us weren't trained to be teachers. We were trained to be research scientists. So we get to our first couple classes and we're just doing anything we can to put together a product that the students might enjoy and learn something from. And when I finally sat down, I years later decided, what exactly do I want my students to learn in this course in cognitive psychology or in methods and so forth? And I realized when I made that's very clear what I wanted them to learn, I wanted them to really learn a lot less than I was teaching them. And hence what I decided was to teach them less, but for those things they really had to learn well, I was going to have them approach it differently, and I was going to teach them more of that. So by going through this as teachers, I think it's absolutely critical, because you might realize, you know, I've been teaching X, Y, and Z for the last couple of years, and you know what? My students don't really need to know that. What they need to know is this other, what they need to master is something else. So I think it can have a profound impact on your teaching, and certainly students need to know what they're expected to learn. Else, how can you really approach this in an efficient way, right?
All right. So I'm betting that, the student, wait, go back to those two things he told us to do. So let's do that, right? I mean, I know that when I look at cognitive science, and if I have 5 seconds with anybody in an elevator or on the street, I say 40 years of cognitive science, space practice, retrieval practice. And that's very jargony. For students, what are those top two recommendations? So you mentioned them. Could you unpack that just a little? If I were to use those, what do I do?
Okay, first they're very different. Space practice, I'll start there, is not really a strategy. It's just a schedule of practice, okay? And it's powerful. And space practice, though, has a very definitive meaning here. And I love students who start preparing early for exams, right? They're going to plan, they're going to have all these study sessions so they can study, study, study. And if a student does that, and every time they sit down to study for an exam, they study different content, right? So in the first study session for 2 hours, I study everything from chapter 1, right? Then the next time I sit down, I study everything from chapter 2. That is not space practice, okay? That's good practice, right? You have multiple sessions and so forth. Space practice entails studying the same content on different occasions. So you might start with, say, studying chapter 1 during the first session, but on your second session, you go back and restudy that same content, right? And that's what space practice is. And the good news is, every student listening to this uses space practice in almost anything they do well. For instance, when I talk to students, they often say, well, I'm good at dance. I'm good at, say, playing some instrument like guitar or what have you. Or I'm really good at, a lot of them say they're good at first action shooter video games. And I ask them how they get good at that. How did they get so good? And what they do without realizing it, they describe space practice. That is, every night I kind of turn on that video game, I start playing it, play it till I get tired. Next night I do it again, and lo and behold, after many months of that, all of a sudden they're expert video players, experts at playing guitar and so forth. The same thing holds true for studying. The only way to really master something is just to keep going back and engaging in that same content. That's what space practice is. Space practice, however, doesn't tell you how to engage in that content when you come back. That is, it's not the strategy you're using to learn the content, it's just a schedule of how you're using the strategy. So one strategy that you can use when you're going to, say, study chapter 1 on multiple different sessions, and chapter 2 and chapter 3 and so forth, is retrieval practice. And there's lots of ways retrieval practice, can be used in your benefit, okay? The way I think about it is just trying to recall information from memory. So if you're trying to learn a lot of definitions, well, you show yourself a key term for the definition, and without looking, you try to recall the meaning or gist of that definition. And we know in all our intro courses, right, that you have to take, there's so many definitions you need to learn because they're fundamental or foundational for that particular class. So using retrieval practice or trying to retrieve that content, right, the meaning from your own memory is vital. And it's vital for 2 reasons. First, if you can't recall the content, you need to study more. That is, retrieval practice allows you to monitor what you've learned. And it turns out research conducted by Catherine Rawson and Katie Wisman has shown that many students already use retrieval practice to monitor how well they've learned something, right? Because if you don't get it right, oh geez, I need to study this more. The great thing about retrieval practice, however, is that if you recall something correctly, let's say you're studying biology and you're studying photosynthesis, and you can recall all of the steps of photosynthesis from your memory, the act of recalling that from memory actually boosts your retention of that content. It's amazing. And each time you go back to retrieve it again, you'll notice that you're getting faster at retrieving that content because you're retaining it better. You're learning it better. So not only can retrieval practice help you know what you do and you don't know, it is also going to have a long-term impact on your retention. Sure, it's effortful. It takes some more time than, say, just rereading your notes or rereading your chapter every time you come back. But, something like retrieval practice, the effort here is worth it because it's going to lead to long-term retention. So those two, the one strategy, retrieval practice, combined with spaced schedule of learning, can be a really powerful way to prepare for your exams. Now, one thing you might be thinking, though, is like, oh, that would take a lot of time. Yeah, it definitely takes time. Studying takes time. However, why you want to know your learning objectives is because you really only want to be using these time-consuming strategies to learn the content that is most important for class, right? So you got to work with your teacher to find out what they really want you to learn, so then you can take that content and spend the extra time using these strategies to really excel at your classes. So those are just kind of two techniques that, I tell students about a lot, right?
Well, I love the way you underlined really the point about spacing is not just separating it out, but separating out your studying of the same material, right?
Right,
And quite clearly, anybody listening goes, "Oh yeah, when I cram for an exam the night before, there is no spacing," right?
right.
So I do want to pick up. I want to pick up on, both spacing and retrieval practice or practice testing clearly can grow across the board. But when we go look at upper level classes, right? Any additional strategies? What's next? I think clearly if you are, start with spacing and retrieval practice, but now when we think about upper level classes, more essay types of exams, more short answer exams, how would you modify how you study?
Well, certainly more essay style questions, right? And they can come in a variety of different forms. Certainly, I would study for those by trying to answer those questions from memory prior to the exam. So get some sense about the kinds of essay questions will be asked. However, we know for advanced courses, they're often advanced because they require a lot more than just knowledge about the fundamental concepts. You need to put them together. You need to go beyond them. You have to be really deeply comprehend them. And, for that kind of stuff, I think certainly you can rely on retrieval practice, especially if the practice tests that you're giving yourself push your comprehension to show you when you're not comprehending the concept versus where you are. But quite frankly, this is where one of the most important strategies is really to have a high expectation for what your teacher is going to bring to the table in that really upper level course, because it's their job to really reveal the beauty of these difficult concepts by clearing away the fog of your lack of comprehension. That is, it's their job to help to try to explain this difficult content, right, in a manner to help you understand it. So your job as a student is to do your best to understand these explanations in class, but also soon after each class to sit down with your notes and try to identify what you didn't understand. Because again, the advanced courses are advanced for a reason. They're more difficult, right? The concepts tend to be more difficult and complicated. And the idea here is if you just had a lecture on something that's difficult and you didn't understand it at the point of attack at all, like you look at your notes and you're confused, you need to then go talk to your teacher, talk to another friend who you think might have a better grasp of it. Is that a study strategy per se? No, but it's a learning strategy, right? Utilizing your friends and all the resources you have available to you to really get past the challenge of, say, your lack of comprehension for content that's difficult, that I know you can comprehend, but sometimes for difficult content, you just need a lot of extra help or scaffolding. So really, it's up to you to understand when you don't understand so that you can seek help, right, from teachers and students. Learning should be, in my mind, should be a collaborative effort. And certainly in college, it should be something that you share with everyone, including your teachers. So don't worry about the fact that you're tripping up or having challenges or don't understand anything. If you're never having challenges or don't understand stuff, you're probably not taking really challenging courses, right? But you're bound to trip over stuff occasionally, and just use all the resources at hand. That's why you're going to a good institute, right? A good college, because you have all these resources there for you. You just have to know when to use them.
So, John, I definitely want to underline something you just said because there are two elements here. One, you nicely built on how monitoring is important, right? And to put those into a pragmatic, when you take notes in a class, don't just leave those notes until next class. Look at them right after class, right? And I really wanted to highlight that note-taking part because that's a huge issue, right? You take the notes, look at them, so monitor, right? Look at your notes right after class. And you also, had two elements in there that I wanted to separate out, for our listeners is yes, there's, what the teacher is doing, but the students also got to make that effort. If the student doesn't ask that question, we faculty, we don't know what needs more. So yes, don't just expect the faculty to do everything. And by the same token, faculty, don't just wait until the students do it. Let's meet someplace in between. But good Lord, monitor your note taking, look at your notes and things like that.
Actually, for teachers out there, one thing I do with the monitoring note-taking is I do have a couple very brief multiple choice questions that I give at the beginning of each class that pertain to one of the prior classes. And the first thing I do is tell students, do not look at your notes, try to answer these from memory. That is, try to retrieve the correct answers from memory. And then right after they attempt that, then I tell them, okay, if you didn't get the right answer, I want you to take a minute or two to see if the answer is in your notes. Partly because I, as a teacher, know I lectured on it and it should be there. And quite often, the light bulb goes off with the students because they'll go back to their notes and they'll realize the content that should be in there to help them answer that question isn't there. So if students mostly rely on their notes to prepare for exams and those notes are incomplete, then of course they're not going to do well. In fact, I mentioned something that when I was a young assistant professor, which used to bother me, was that student that got a C that said they worked hard, and I just didn't believe that they were working hard. Well, yeah, I do believe they're working hard. And anymore, the first thing I ask that student with that low grade is I ask them to see their notes. And many times what happens is I look at their notes and they have spent a lot of time and effort studying them, but yet the notes are either inaccurate or incomplete. All the content that they need to know is not there. And quite frankly, it's not typically devastating. That is, it's not that is nothing is there, but sometimes to understand a concept, you might have to really have 3 ideas down, not just 2 of the 3. So when I see incomplete notes, it's like, oh, you just didn't get everything down there. So of course you're not going to be able to work this through later on. So I agree, absolutely. Check your notes. I would check it against other students' notes, talk about them again. Think about this whole endeavor as a collaboration toward excellence in learning. And your collaborators are your teachers, your friends in class, YouTube videos, anything you can get your hands onto that are going to help you get by challenges, right? Jump over those hurdles. But the hurdles are going to be there. Hopefully someday you'll find all those hurdles fun, right?
So, John, speaking of fun, here's a fun question for you. Laptop or longhand? We're talking about note taking.
Wow.
Yeah, okay, that was a curveball. Love. I just saw the recent paper on it that was a meta-analysis on all those studies. For those of you out there listening, for years, many of us faculty relied on a 2014 paper that said laptop use is better. John, your take.
Yeah, my take, and this, for those of you who like a very black or white answer, my take is not going to be appreciated because it all depends. Okay? And the good news is it all depends on factors that I think many students are already very well aware of. For instance, if you're taking a class where the teacher is great but just happens to talk very quickly. In fact, one of our best teachers at Kent State psychology department is so effective, but he's just so quick. You can't take notes fast enough with this guy with a hand. You need to use a laptop, right, to keep up with that stuff. If you're taking a math class or you have lots of formulas, pictures and so forth that you need to transcribe, well, many laptops are going to fail you. Okay? With that said, I don't think there's really any other inherent benefit for using a laptop or longhand, whatever you feel most comfortable with. Nevertheless, laptops can be detrimental to learning, and let me explain why. It really has to do with the distraction factor. Okay? We find in our research that if you're taking notes by longhand, writing, or by laptop, those notes tend to be similar, and you get just about as much benefit of taking it either way. However, other research, like by Melody Weishart, has shown what probably everyone, especially every student, understands, that if you're using a laptop to take notes, then the people to the left of you, to the right of you, behind you, could potentially be distracted by your typing. Even worse, I've evaluated lots of teachers teaching before, and I'm watching students and what they're doing on their laptops. And I can tell you now that if instead of paying attention to the teacher and taking good notes, you're instead surfing the web, right, for the latest YouTube craze, then you probably aren't really taking notes with a laptop. That shouldn't even count, but yet it happens a lot. And in fact, unfortunately, that's even more distracting, right, to the people beside you when you're doing that kind of thing. So personally, I would not ban laptops from the classroom. By all means, I think some students take better notes probably with a laptop because they can keep up. What I would do though, when I teach, is ask the students who are using a laptop to move to the back of the class so they're not distracting, that kind of thing. So they can, basically not other students who don't want that extra distraction, who just want to take notes by longhand. But I think the jury is out. I'm looking forward to seeing other people's research on which works best, right? But I think it probably all depends.
Yeah, wonderfully concisely stated answer, John. I mean, I appreciated you tackled a lot of really cool things on there. So, just a couple of more quick questions, right? One of them, I alluded in the opening to what is now a very well cited your paper in Psych Science on, learning and what works. This would be a wonderful opportunity for the folks who haven't run into it. I think we've already talked about two of those, in quotes, high utility or useful skills, spacing and retrieval practice. But there were some really surprising findings there of what was low utility. I mean, in your words, what surprised you about what students normally do that don't work that well?
Probably two things. I would say they were surprising that they don't work well, but let me put it in context. So two things, strategies that we identified as low utility were highlighting as you're reading, right, using a highlighter, as well as just simply rereading information. And let me just quickly talk about this, because first, we all use look, here's one of my favorite highlighters right here on the table, okay? And when we say highlighting doesn't have an impact on learning, what we mean if you're highlighting and reading, and another person is just reading. And then right after you've done that activity that is highlighted and read versus just read, both of those students are going to do just about as well on a test if I give you a surprise quiz. Okay? However, so that's why highlighting really doesn't improve people's retention of the material as they're highlighting. With that said, I would never tell a student to put that highlighter down. First, again, we all love it. We love to highlight when we're reading. The key is though, when you're highlighting, of course, it's the beginning of the learning journey. You need to highlight the things that are most important that you know your teacher wants you to learn so that you can go back then and use effective strategies like retrieval practice to learn it well. So by no means am I poo-pooing the use of highlighters. It's just the beginning of the journey and not the end. The one thing though that really kind of shocked me, that in many contexts, going back to just reread the material. So let's say you read a chapter and you decide, you know what, I have a little bit extra time. I'm going to go back and just start rereading some of it. That kind of rereading really can at times have no impact on your learning of the content. I mean, literally none. It's a complete waste of time. So I would recommend don't rely heavily on rereading as a major strategy. When you go back to study your notes again, if you use spaced practice, instead of just rereading all your notes, why not go back and use retrieval practice instead of reading? Don't get me wrong, if you don't retrieve something correctly, you're going to have to go back and reread then, right? You're going to need feedback so you can correct yourself. But rereading often is just passive. I mean, and you get this, many of us read late at night, and you have that experience, right? You're reading something and your eyes are moving across the page, and you maybe even flip a page or two, and all the time your mind is just wandering, right? A rereading is kind of passive, and it really lends to kind of mind wandering and all these kinds of things that really don't help you learn. So I would toss, rereading out. I use a highlighter to highlight the things that instead of when you go back, you're just not going to reread what you highlighted, but you're going to test yourself on it. So let's change some of these bad strategies into good strategies by using them in the right way.
And I think, as I think there's something really neat and interesting to point out in what you're saying, which is just don't throw out highlighting and things like that. But I think for many strategies, I don't. When we tell students to study more, I mean that's the worst, right? Study more. Well, that tells you nothing.
Right,
I think what you're nicely saying is even for something such as spacing, for such as a retrieval practice, such as highlighting, know that you're doing it well, right?
right.
And even flashcards. I mean, a lot of students think, here's my stack of flashcards. Clearly, I'm studying well enough. Well, I think even what you mentioned in terms of flashcard for retrieval practice is good, but let's not forget that deeper processing, right? Make up an example. You mentioned studying with friends. Yeah, and that's learning, right? Go beyond that memorizing, come up with examples. And I think that deeper processing is so important here too. And I love the way you said, yeah, even highlighting can be okay.
Absolutely. And it's something like I certainly totally advocate the use of flashcards, but so you finally can recall, say, the meaning or definition of a concept. It doesn't mean you necessarily can use it. So going beyond that to say, as when you're studying with a friend, it's like, okay, you correctly retrieve the meaning of that concept, say, some kind of conditioning concept. Now let me know how you would use it. So, push yourself to generate examples and so forth. At least will produce deeper learning. And if you do that in a collaboration, it could also help you out, because then when you can't generate a good example, you have a friend there that can help you out. And then when both of you can't produce a good example or understand the true meaning, then that's when you go talk to your teacher, send an email like, we're confused. I think I know this concept, but I don't quite understand it yet. Help me out.
That's great. So John, as we sum up here, if I quickly process all that you've said, I want to put it into the context of where we are at this point in time, right? I mean, we're in a pandemic. A lot of us will be facing remote teaching and learning once more. I think you've already given us some really key stuff. For example, you've said make sure you're planning and scheduling your studying well so you can do spacing and retrieval practice. I loved what you said about start early, right? For all of us who start in some weeks from now or whenever we start, do all this stuff the first week. The moment you get your syllabi, plan early, start early, get these habits into place early. I think I would probably add, get familiar with the technology. You nicely said monitor, good note taking, monitor your notes, right? And probably for all of us, is the environments that we're in, right? Find the environment that works. I look at your plant in the background. We all have certain environments that we pick to focus on. I look out at a wonderful green, grassy area. I think those kind of things contribute to studying and learning as well. But so rarely do we say, or draw attention to, are you studying in a noisy place? Is the TV on? Is there music on? Is all this stuff going on? And I think especially now during a pandemic, that seems so important. But anything you want to add for these times in studying and learning?
Just one thing, and one thing that concerns me a bit, quite frankly. For any student out there who are at a university and they want that face-to-face class, and for the next semester, maybe for the entire year, you're remote, I'm going to encourage you to not treat that remote course like it's an online course. They are different entities, okay? The research we've done shown that students often engage in online courses differently. About 60% of students at Kent State say they never take notes when they're watching videos on online courses. That's not going to work for your remote courses. Your faculty are still conceiving of this like it's a face-to-face course where, they might be lecturing. Yeah, that might be videotaped. You may not be seeing it in real time. But if you're not taking notes, right, the things that really are going to fuel your studying, right, on your way to being prepared for the exam, you're going to perform poorly. So to the best of your ability, I would encourage you to treat these remote courses as much as you can as if it's a normal face-to-face. So treat it like you would, like a normal face-to-face. Take your notes, do what you do, talk to other students and so forth.
That is a wonderful note to end. John, thank you so much for your time. Wonderful, wonderful responses, right on point. I think you've given a lot of folks really the things to hone in on to make studying and learning better. So thank you very much. Great
That's,
pleasure and an honor to chat with you. Thank you.
oh, it's all my pleasure. And for all the students out there, good luck next year. It's going to be a great year for everybody, right?